Well, I want to bring in, we have a guest today. If you've looked at the thumbnail, you may have spotted who this is. It's somebody else from Cockroach Labs team. I want to welcome our famous Rob Reid here to the team. Let's pick a wide angle shot so we can see it. How you doing, Rob?
Hello, very well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Greg and Felipe. It's lovely to be here.
One of the things that I had of the good fortune to do was I had somebody reached out and I had a chance to peer review a particular book that has is it if it's out yet. Wait, I'm going to put it up here
It
on the
is.
thing. Oh, wait a minute. That's not the one I want. I wanted this one, CockroachDB, the Definitive Guide, second edition. Um, you want to talk about a little bit about that?
I would love to. So this is actually my third CockroachDB book that I've written, and I'm really proud to be involved in this one because this is the definitive guidebook. When people say, "Oh, you wrote the book on CockroachDB," prior to having contributed a small part to this book, I could only say I've written a book on CockroachDB, which made my interview process through Cockroach Labs quite a lot more straightforward had I not written the book. I might do that forever now. Write a book about the company you want to join and then go for
Yeah.
the interview. It changes things slightly. But this one is a big update. So the first edition of the book was released for version 21.2, and a lot of time has passed since it first went into production. So we're now at the time of that I committed to a version, we're at 24.2. So 3 large steps and a bunch of new functionality that's available. So it was a really interesting bit of work to write. So not only have I had the privilege of contributing to this book, I've also kind of inadvertently cannibalized what remaining audience I may have had for the book I originally wrote.
Well, that's how you do it. It's so that's the secret sauce. I would say to doing that. I'm sitting there flipping stuff around, trying to make. I want to get a look here. Well, that's fantastic. One of the things that I'm very intrigued is you're our technical evangelist. So you are, from my vantage point, forever out there interacting with the community in different ways. Whether you're making video content that's coming on this channel, nice channel here, which by the way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you catch the next video Rob puts out or the next episode of the show here. Um, but you also are on stage and at various Roach Fest events, other stuff, and
I
so
am.
you get a certain insight into what people are building and using CockroachDB for.
Yes. Yep. To a certain extent. I'm really appreciative for the time I get to spend with customers and prospects. So people like to bring me into things as an evangelist. I do and can wax lyrical about CockroachDB. I've got a CockroachDB tattoo on my body, for goodness sake. Actually, I've got 2. We've got a port number, 26257. It's the only port number that actually matters to me. And I've gotten both. Probably the second of many tattoos. But yes,
I don't have a sound
I
effect. I want to play a
was.
sound effect when I heard that because that brought a tear to my eye. I've
Do
never
you have
who's
do you have a sound effect ready?
I don't. That's the thing.
Ah,
This is what's coming in the show. This is what I've been working off on the sidelines with our video editors. I've got a clip that I want to record, and then I need some other sounds. And one was the sad trombone sound. I was not going to use sad trombone sound,
you can always add
but
it in
the
post.
but I need the applause, like yay, kind of.
And actually, I got them before joining CockroachDB as well. So another reason I was able to secure the job. Again, write a book about the company, get a tattoo of the company, and they can't turn you away. So yes, lots of YouTube videos. I think we're probably at about 120 recorded videos now. Not all of them are made. They weren't on YouTube yet. A bunch of webinars, including this live stream. So some around thought leadership. I did a really interesting one on DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, with a company called FinExtra a while back. And it was really interesting because DORA is going to become a massive thing in Europe and the UK. And as we saw with GDPR and CCPA, eventually it's going to go across the world. So using databases like CockroachDB can really help an organization come to terms with the reality that monolithic legacy databases aren't necessarily keeping up with the regulations.
Well, and that's a profound statement. When I was first before I got even in the door for an interview, and I was chatted with Our previous director of technical training, that was something brought to my awareness, was CockroachDB's ability to satisfy regulatory compliance, because the ability to say, well, this data needs to live here, but that data needs to live there. We need to put oversight controls on it. There's a lot of places where that plays into, whether we're talking about the EU, UK. There's also
even within the US, the
in the
Federal Wire Act.
US, there's 50 states in the United States, and they all have certain levels of compliance. So there's certain shops where that really fits nicely. And if you use a database that it's built in intrinsically, like multi-region support or data domiciling, that we haven't really delved into heavily, at least on this show much, it's a killer feature to be able to do that versus having it bolted on top after the fact.
Yeah, for sure.
Very quickly. Sorry, I have my copy. The first edition, and you need to sign it, Rob. I have also Greg's books as well. So I'm a big fan of Greg for Spring Boot with Packt Publishing, and I know that, Rob, you also had a book for Apress.
That's
right?
it. That's it's called
also,
Practical CockroachDB.
Yes, and I have that too. And I was working with some of the kind of main guys on Apress. Also, I'm a book author for all the Spring ecosystem. So very nice, very nice. I mean, now that I see that not only you have this copy, practically you have even O'Reilly, right? I think you have also like a small, I think it was like an application or something about distributed applications or something like that.
Understanding
right?
multi-region application
Yes.
architecture. It's a mouthful. But
yeah, I was
yes.
going to say that.
Yes.
It's a big interesting topic, because I go to a lot of events and I've never spoken to anyone who didn't want their business to grow. I think, it's a kind of given. You have a business and you want it to grow. And sometimes that necessitates going across multiple regions and all the complexity that would historically have entailed. With a database like CockroachDB, the architectural simplification that it affords you is massive, because all you have to think about as an engineer is, and this is for software engineers, you don't have to be a database administrator with decades of experience to operate CockroachDB. You have your single region, because maybe your business started in a single region, or maybe even an availability zone, or maybe just on a server. And then you just expand it. And then you apply rules to say where data can or cannot go. And that might sound complicated, but it's as simple as changing the locality of a table. And that's a single line statement. Everything's declarative. So you tell CockroachDB what you want it to do, and it does the rest for you. So having a technology like this available for me is just as big a change to the database world as Kubernetes was to the orchestration of applications world. I think we've been blessed with a couple of epochs throughout, the last couple of decades, of which I believe CockroachDB is a strong part.
That's a good example too. You mentioned like the alluding to Kubernetes, the containerization stuff. We had virtual machines kind of showed up, I'd say about 30 years ago, because I remember seeing them in college. They were sort of what that looks nice, but who needs that? And they quickly became a commodity in value. And then somebody was like, yeah, but that's a heavyweight commodity. Let's lighten the load. And thus emerged containers, in a decade after that. And again, it seemed as if the first reaction was, okay, that looks cute over in its corner. And then suddenly you start seeing things like, what about pipelines, like CI pipelines, where every step is a container? What about services where I'm spinning up a service and this microservice needs 3 containers and that service needs 2 containers. And now suddenly it's a YAML file about what do I need to bring the system up. So seeing something like distributed database with, multi-region support, zone failure stuff, which is just a few declarative statements about, I want this thing to fail over at the AZ level. I want this to fail over at the regional level. Okay, we'll go do that for you.
Yeah.
And I've found this, I don't know if this is controversial, but has anybody noticed the brouhaha that's emerged in the last 48 hours about a certain venerable software engineer discussing that SQL needs to be deep sixed? the author of Clean Code, has commented that SQL is something that we need to move beyond and instead using APIs. And I kind of have an opposite opinion on it. SQL has been here for 50 years and amazingly has proven through the market that, to me, it's the first DSL for writing data,
Yes.
for interacting with data, for defining data, for accessing, for querying and inserting data. If it's here after 50 years and engineers can use it, business analysts, program managers, interns that you hire in the summer quarter or whatever can pick up and run with it. Well, that's fantastic.
I completely agree. So if you expose SQL over HTTP, which companies do, some databases support, inevitably it comes back to SQL because, as you say, in 50 years, we haven't got anything better. SQL is still the most natural language to interact with the database. And part of a migration story that I've had in the past was taking a team from using a very specific database with a very specific interface. I won't give the name of the database. I think that's immaterial. But in order to speak to that database, you had to use a language that was defined by that database. And part of the decision to move to Cockroach is it allowed us to work in a distributed fashion. We were running across 17 disparate instances of the same application and database stack, very difficult to manage. And I just wanted the engineers to speak SQL. In order to interact with the database, the most natural way to do it is via SQL. And I think the impact, the positive impact you get of having a team that speaks SQL interact with the database, as opposed to having to go through a couple of experts within your team, like increasing your bus factor, is huge.
Yeah, and it's it makes you realize at a certain point, instead of getting caught up in I'm going to speak to this API or what am I going to do to interact with it? What technology am I using to do it? Instead, I'm thinking of what's the data? How do I put the data together? So I need to know the nature of the relationship of the data in order to do that, in order to write join queries. So I need to go learn what the data is, how it comes together. I'm going to write that, and that is my code can start to use data flows. And since I'm going to pull this data, and what's my app doing to it? Is it just serving it straight up to a dashboard, or does it need to go through some transformative process and then make some kind of decision or recommendation, something like that? To me, it kind of elevates your thinking, and it's like I'm not hung up thinking about digesting a piece of JSON data or something like that, or what have you.
Yeah, unless you want to store JSON, which you absolutely can for semi-structured data. But it all depends on the work.
Absolutely.
And I hate saying this, but it all depends on the workload.
Yeah, it does. Some of the things I've seen is that I guess a lot of people that come to CockroachDB come to it. Maybe it's not their first stop. Let's put it that way. Or a lot of shops they started somewhere else and then they grew and they grew and they made mirrors or something. We've got 2 servers at our centralized data center. One's a hot standby backup ready to go. It's got a 10 gig fiber thing to connect the primary with the backup, that kind of thing. And then there's 10 mirrors spread around. And they're like, we've hit the limit. We can't scale this anymore. The cost to take the update back to the central server is killing us. We need something different. And they come here. The sheer volume of the data is making it not pragmatic anymore. It's like, come, and they're like, so, okay, can I just take everything that I just did and drop it on it and it's going to magically work? Probably not. We're at a meeting, we're at a training session last November for a particular customer. And we looped in one of our enterprise architects because we needed some of the expert opinions. We had the training team has a lot of knowledge, but we needed a specific expert opinion. And in that conversation with one of our enterprise architects, the expression "the speed of light" showed up in the conversation, because it's like we have a data center on the East Coast, we have people on the West Coast, and it's like we cannot ignore the speed of light. It has an impact, so we need to think suitably. Where are you going to put the trade-off? And so
the speed of light is one of our biggest competitors, if not our biggest competitor. And it's the competitor that we will never beat.
And people may be boggled at, what are we talking about? What do you mean? Well, there's a simple nature to, okay, if I'm going to update a table, let's imagine I've got copies in, I like to say, San Francisco on the West Coast of the United States, New York, London, and Amsterdam. So the data is kind of spread out. If somebody in San Francisco is going to issue an update, when is the person in Amsterdam supposed to see that update? What you have to, it's not free. There's a cost to that. So either the idea is, either everybody needs to go, if the row itself is living on the cluster, on the node that's in San Francisco, everybody either needs to go back to San Francisco to read that row of data, and you have to pay the cost there, or you can sit there and make it a global table or global row where all the tables are going to be in sync. And so the cost is paid at the insert point or the update, when the update happens. So instead, we're going to say that row, that update is not visible for whatever, half a second or 4.2 seconds, whatever the range of that is. So it's something that you never think about until you get into that scale, but then you need to think about it and make a decision. And depending on what piece of data you're talking about, it matters.
Yeah, and when you mentioned the global writing, I could probably whiteboard if it makes more sense. I'd love to go into the details on the table topologies, because I think it took me a while to understand, and the penny only really dropped for me when I was really in the weeds with the first book. So I don't know if hang on, let me just, hopefully, there we go. Now I can see my whiteboard. AI. I love it.
Or to be locking onto your eyes, only it's confusing which set of eyes to lock onto. So, all right, take it away.
So what we're looking at here, let's create exactly what you had initially. So we've got San Francisco here. On the East Coast, maybe we've got, let's say, Northern Virginia. And over here, we have Amsterdam. Oh, Amsterdam there. You've got a bunch of options. If you want all your users in these areas to have a good experience of the database, for reads and writes, you can use a table topology pattern called regional by row. And that means all of their data will be housed close to them. You can have it replicated across to another region for regional survivability if you like. But let's say you've got a single region, you're pinning data to that one region. You can use super regions. So let's say you have maybe San Francisco, Oregon, and Washington, for example. You can build those into what we would call a super region, but I'll just keep it simple for now. So they've got their data, we'll call that A. They've got their data, we'll call that B. They've got their data, we'll call that C. Reads and writes for these users, depending on their proximity to the database nodes themselves, will be in the single digit, low 2-digit millisecond latencies, depending on how, again, it comes down to the speed of light. But what you're not going to see is this user's data, if you don't want it to be, over here, especially over there. You might, let's say, allow data to live between these two regions, because maybe San Francisco data and Northern Virginia data is fine to share for resilience purposes. But what happens if you need data that exists across all of these? And that's where Greg was talking about global tables. So let's say we have a seldom updated but very frequently read piece of metadata, well, maybe product information, let's call that P. That can exist identically in all three regions. But the trade-off that Greg's talking about is you pay a higher latency cost when it comes to writing, because we need to make sure, Cockroach needs to make sure that when that data is written, it's also available here and it's also available here, before we return to the caller to say, yep, your data has been written and committed successfully. What you can do with all of these users is they will get an immediate real-time consistent view of the product table. But if they want even faster access to the data, they can run a follower read query, which allows them to select ever so slightly stale data. So it's really flexible. You can there's four main topology patterns. One's follow the workload. So the table will ensure low read and write latencies for where the database is busiest. So that would be a kind of follow the sun mode. Maybe users come online in Singapore, and as time moves across, the read latency and write latency remains consistently low for everyone. You've got regional by row, which is great for these circumstances where you've got multiple users online at any one time and their data needs to be pinned. Then there's regional tables. Perhaps this company that we're servicing has some administration data, and they're a San Franciscan company. They only want to keep that in San Francisco. That's a regional table. And then I think I've probably covered all four now. Yes, I think so. But yeah, that's the table topology patterns. And that's why I love multi-region so much, because CockroachDB makes it so easy.
Yeah, that was one of those killer features that I was like, the first time I heard about it, I was like, holy smokes, that is freaking wicked. We actually have a whole separate course, well, I should say a whole separate module that we've created for multi-region specifically. Um, right now, I think it's a day or day and a half course, whatever. But this was a feature that we ran into this particular customer. We were doing training in November. We had to sort of pause. We were giving them the application developer course, which is 4 days of building apps for CockroachDB. We don't teach basic SQL. We try to teach what's the delta, like what is CockroachDB. What do you need to know specifically from a distributed SQL perspective to sizzle with that? But this customer really needed multi-region. They had actually embarked upon using multi-region without being fully versed on it, and so we kind of had to help bail them out. So we had a half a day where we stepped aside and said, let's talk about multi-region. Let's do a crash course in that. And then once you get it, you get it.
Yeah, but it's important to get it. And there's more than one thing to think about. I'm going to have to whiteboard again. I'm sorry, you're going to see a lot of whiteboarding, I think, today. But I think another really important and interesting challenge that distributed SQL databases encounter is application co-location. So let's say we've got our database node over here, or our region. It's going to be a single database node. We've got a user over here. My users are going to get gradually less and less looking like people. And our application may be over here. If the latency, or let's say the distance between the user and the application is 500 kilometers, and the distance between the database and the application is maybe, let's say, 700 kilometers. The total round trip time for that request is going to be the sum of the distances here and here. So 1,300 kilometers for a request. So we like to help customers design their clusters so that it takes advantage of application co-location, because this is, perhaps too far geographically for a database request to be made. Whereas if you'd co-located the database, and not only that, that's one way that it's going to actually be 2,600 kilometers to make that full round trip. If instead you've co-located the application and database, maybe within the same data center, now we're down to 0 kilometers now. Now the total round trip time is much less than the total round trip time before. And that gets even worse if you consider, let's say, a user who wants to run across the US and Europe. Now we're talking 5,000 kilometers at least. Now, if you've got a database node over here, a user over, let's say, here, but an application, see, I told you they'd get bizarre looking, and an application over here, they would talk to the application. They want their data domiciled over here, so we'd make a trip back. So that's 5,000, then back again. So 20,000 kilometers to make one request.
Eesh.
So I think it's really important as part of the training, and just sharing knowledge about CockroachDB and distributed SQL in general, is to help customers realize one of the biggest performance benefits they're going to get in a distributed SQL database is correctly architecting their environment for distributed SQL. Because a user in that scenario is going to get a terrible experience of the application because it hasn't been architected in a way that lends itself nicely to it.
And that's something that really, that really catches my eye, because I can remember sitting in like team meetings doing, trying to noodle out entity relationships, or, okay, what's the entity type here? What's the entity type here? What's the cardinality between the tables? That kind of stuff. And you think, okay, we've got to do that. We'll do that. And it's like, hold on. It's almost like, you need to do that, and you need to do this. If you don't take into account both of these aspects, you're dead in the water, and you're going to say, well, this product's terrible. It's like, is the product terrible, or this is the physical nature of what you're doing now?
Yeah, the product is very powerful, and with great power comes great responsibility, I think.
Aha. That's a banner.
To quote, who was it? Batman? I don't know.
Spider-Man, or Spider-Man's uncle, I think.
I'm joking.
We're not going to get demonetized or something. We're not monetized, that's really cool. Now let's, one of the other things that one of my discoveries is I'd had it burned into me, from long ago, like monotonic sequence counters. And I remember when I first heard the expression, I was like, say that again. What monotonic sequence counters? And that's like the bread and butter for building up schema design, for a classic database. It just means a counter that always goes up. Einbahnstraße is like one way, just up, up, up. And when you go to something like CockroachDB, you do not do that, because CockroachDB tries to distribute the load. By default, unless you've put in some regional settings, for example, it'll distribute the rows across the enterprise, and you want it to randomize that. If you use sequence counters, they're all going to end up in a single node. They're going to be hammering a node. We call that a hotspot. So that's why we recommend things like UUIDs that have a natural, locally generatable nature, so that you can randomly generate keys that will spread it across the enterprise. There's some of these little things. It's like, okay, that makes sense fundamentally, because I couldn't imagine going 5,000 kilometers to reach a sequence counter and then coming 5,000 kilometers back to ingest that value that I just got. That's ludicrous to do that. So, you do that kind of thing. And so you realize, okay, UIDs are where it's at. What's the impact to my application? Well, gee, that could be a huge ripple impact to an already built application that you're trying to migrate.
Yeah, and I think if people are coming from a traditional database, they are going to be thinking in terms of sequences, monotonically incrementing IDs. And it might even be for, let's say, a time-based database, it might be a timestamp, but the problem remains, it's still monotonically increasing. And I hope you don't mind, I'm going to whiteboard this again, because I think hotspots are really nice to visualize, especially when we talk about monotonically incrementing integers, because if we've got 3 nodes, and I'm so sorry, I keep on whiteboarding, but I think I'm addicted. I think it's becoming a problem.
You're coming back on the show in the future, FYI. I love it.
I'm not going to draw a person, because it's just going to be a squiggle now. But if you've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ID sequence, those aren't going to be distributed across your cluster. The way CockroachDB works is it distributes data in ranges, and it builds out ranges and splits ranges when they get too big. But each node will have a copy of the data. So we'll call these ranges. This is range A, and there's 3 replicas of it. So this is range A2, let's say. This is range range A1, and this is range A3. Now, we're going to make sure that the data exists on at least three nodes, depending on your replication factor. But the data is going to be written in. So let's say A1 is the leaseholder. That's the replica that controls or orchestrates reads and writes for that particular range. And what's going to happen is we write 1, and then we write 2, and then we write 3, and then we write 4. And the default size of a range in CockroachDB is 0.5 GB in size. So we're going to carry on writing rows until we hit that 0.5 GB before we even consider creating a new range for that table. And then maybe we'll be over here. But in that time, A1 was really hot. And now maybe we're in the next one. Now we're writing, 40 million and something, 40 million and 1. And now this node's getting hot. It's better to, as Greg says, randomize the data. So instead of having 1, 2, and 3, you've got maybe AC, F2, 1, 4. Now these are uniformly random and can be distributed across the cluster. So if you're going via a load balancer, each one of these nodes is just as warm as the next one. You haven't got any particularly hot nodes. If you can't get around using monotonically incrementing IDs, all hope isn't lost. You can create a hash sharded index. So 1 might become FC, 2 might become E4, etc. So there are ways you can do it. It's not completely lost. And customers who are very tightly ingrained in sequences, you can harness sequences in CockroachDB. We don't recommend it, but if it helps your migration process, personally, I would say have at it. And then maybe later, when it makes sense for your team, your database, and your applications, then consider non-monotonically incrementing IDs.
Trying to put up something here that I had, when you said something that clicked in my head, and so I had to put a little something up. You want to share the load.
Share the load. Does he actually say that? I can't remember him saying. I can imagine him saying it. Share the load,
Yeah,
Mr.
it's
Frodo. But
it's way at the end of the third movie, whatever. But I just thought, yes, okay,
oh
let's.
yeah.
He's like, is
Then
that
I
all right,
thought,
Mr. Frodo? I could take it for you. I could help share the load.
oh, look
If
at
that
that.
wasn't.
No, that was wonderful. Who would have thought that it was the Tennessee in you lent itself beautifully to a Lord of the Rings accent.
Is this where I tell you my folks are Midwestern? But anyway, I've just been in the Deep South for, I don't know, multiple years. I almost gave the number away. What are some of the others? So we've talked about things like, okay, you've got to account for things like where's the user, where's the app, where's the database. That's even then my mind is just thinking where's the user and where's the database. And you pointed out all three of those parts, those players could be spread in different locations. So we have to account for that. We also talked about hotspots and the benefit of UUIDs. And there's stuff in our training where we cover things like there's other mechanisms like maybe you have a table with 1 billion rows in it. They already have monotonic counters. How can we deal with that? There's other ways to ameliorate that situation. And we've talked about things like regional tables or the permutations there. What are some of the other gotchas that are out there that people need to visit when they're going to come to something like CockroachDB in a migration pattern?
One thing, and it's less technical than you might be expecting, but is the mind shift from disaster recovery to disaster prevention. A lot of customers or prospects will mention CockroachDB in the same breath that they talk about primary secondary architecture. And I think if you have 2 data centers and only access to 2 data centers, you are going to be necessarily in the world of disaster recovery. You run on your primary architecture, and if that fails, you have to have some form of a failover process to the secondary. When we talk about CockroachDB's inherent multi-active raft replication, the conversation shifts, because if you lose a data center, it no longer is a business crippling event. It's simply a business as usual non-event. So you lose a data center, and the 2 remaining data centers take over the load until such a time as the other data center, it might have been taken out by a fire in the data center. We've heard of planes going down near data centers and being cordoned off, Legionnaire's disease, COVID shut a data center. So it could be anything. But as long as that data center is down and you're running across CockroachDB across different regions, or not even regions, physical locations, it becomes a non-event. So I think in order to get the best out of CockroachDB, customers are looking towards, especially customers on legacy hardware, maybe on-prem environments. Maybe they've got access to 3 data centers. Maybe they want to bring the cloud in to bolster their environment. So we create a hybrid environment. Some people burst their workloads into the cloud to help with spikes. So it all comes down again to the architecture, but I think that's one big thing. It's breaking the mindset of disaster recovery and business continuity towards something like disaster prevention. Now, would I recommend you stop doing backups of the database? No. I'd never recommend anyone stop backing up their databases. But you're going to see a lot fewer failures. Anything that would have taken out a building or a region is now going to become something your business just weathers. And I've been on teams where I've been firefighting because of an outage, trying to fail over and failing, and sometimes failing to fail back. It gets really messy to a team that weathered an outage. And I can tell you from experience that it feels better to be on the latter team.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And part of this is people try to think about, well, I don't know, dude, is this kind of thing, it's acting wacky. Okay, is this the kind of thing where, well, do I want to lend budget to this? And the idea is you're in a sense you're already paying for it. The question is the cost in band or out of band? I was on I was part of the software engineering team behind an ops center, and at one point in time, the ops center there was certain devices in certain areas that kept causing spurious tickets to get open that were no issue. They had chronic issues. They stood up a chronic issue resolution team. So they had a dozen people whose sole purpose was to fix chronic issues. And so it's like, where's that in the cost factor? Where was that in the analysis of running the system? Nowhere, because it was an out of band cost that they didn't see coming, and they had to pay overhead for that. So there's an element of, well, I can bring this in. I can have disaster recovery. I can, I think I can see a lot of people coming from I need a primary and a secondary backup system. And when you come to them and say, if you want really backup, you need three. You need to think in terms of threes, so that you don't have the split brain phenomena of one thing goes out and is the other thing in the sink, or what's the deal with that? And if you bring in sort of the real picture of it, you start to see that.
And all hope's not lost. If you're running across 2 data centers, there are solutions as well. We want to meet customers where they are, and where they are might not be running across 3 physical locations, and that's fine. For those customers, we have physical cluster replication, and that simplifies massively the process of failing over and failing back their database from a primary and secondary location. Being able to do that with one SQL command, as opposed to maybe putting people boots on ground within each data center to make sure that everything's working. It's a very different ball game, I think, and it's a ball game that I feel much more confident playing now that we have the technology to do it.
Yeah, it's almost, I want to say it's almost like magic, but I mean, it's not magic. It's kind of, once you figure out, oh, here's what CockroachDB does, and it's like, actually, it's almost
good engineering.
Common sense, I want to say. Good engineering.
It's good engineering. One of our customers was actually saying that. There's a video out there somewhere that says it feels like magic, but it's actually just really good engineering. You're going to type that. I can hear it. Yep. I know if I've referenced something good because I hear typing.
Yeah, I like that. Yes, that's right. You're chock full of good stuff. So that's,
and another thing to think about is the architectural simplification it's going to give you, because we've had customers who've, thanks to Cockroach, have managed to simplify not only their architecture, but also their engineering organizations as a whole. So I would ask customers who are considering Cockroach, what else can you simplify? Be it removing dual writes from your system, because now you can use the transactional outbox pattern with CockroachDB. You write and then you publish a message from its inbuilt CDC, change data capture, as opposed to having to have complex ETL pipelines. There's lots of architectural simplifications. Horizontal scaling is a huge one. I've scaled CockroachDB, and again, as with most things in CockroachDB, in fact, with everything in CockroachDB, it's a business as usual non-event. And that's our sweet spot, I think. We do the hard, boring things so that your teams can get on with the fun, interesting things, like running your business. And I've horizontally scaled and sharded a Postgres database, and there's a video of me doing it, and it nearly killed me. And maybe there's some hyperbole in there, but it mostly killed me. And that was with one table across 2 regions and 6 nodes. And I can't imagine having related tables, more than one related table, and trying to do the same. At the end of this week-long battle with horizontal scaling in Postgres, I still had a fundamentally broken system. So being able to just for horizontal scaling to just go to, just add another node, and the data will be rebalanced. That's the database I want to work with.
Yeah, the one of the customer we'd met with had run into a phenomena where they had not yet been coached on multi-region, and so they had some strict time criteria that that their transaction had to complete in. So they had actually gone to the point of, they'd written some scripts or SQL operations that were cloning. They were cloning the content into another table, and that table was being pinned to a different node in the cluster. So they had basically copies of the data in 2 different locations, and they were doing it all manually. So that, okay, this app can be, I guess, essentially co-located with that node, and this app can be co-located with this node. And then we showed it. We were like, so we gave them that half-day multi-region stuff, and they were like, well, this is where you've been hiding this.
Yeah, and all the extra effort that goes into doing that manually is, as you would say, an out-of-band cost. It's a hidden thing that won't be necessarily calculated by default into the TCO of a database.
Well, I start thinking of, I start hearing, I don't know, alarm bells going off, and I start hearing the words like Debezium, or I hope I don't get busted for this, but things like Apache Kafka, because it seems almost as if people reach for that, as if we need something because we need some kind of coordination. We're trying to coordinate services together, and when you find out, it's like, well, it's now you're having to, I don't know, grab this thing and bolt it onto this thing and then connect this over here, and you're like, you're jury rigging it together, and I don't know, it's throwing some cron jobs to make it complete, and it's like, oh, well, you can write this SQL statement that just generates a CDC query, and we're no longer doing, CQRS based stuff, and instead, oh, look, it comes with the system, and it's now just a nice little management task that's no problem at all. No problem at all.
Yeah, I think maybe I'm less when I hear Kafka, because I think being able to mesh your database into the wider architecture, allow for a push-based notification system versus a pull-based. I would much rather 1,000 consumers of my database be notified by the database that something has changed, as opposed to hammering the database to see if something has changed on the off chance. So I think depending on the architecture, everything has its place, and be that webhook notifications, Kafka, Apache Pulsar, and the like. Having built-in CDC is another, I think, value multiplier, and something that can simplify our architectures. Because, as you say, Debezium is a brilliant but complex product of its own. You need to build it into, in the case of Postgres, the right headlog, and that's more additional manual plumbing that you have to do, as opposed to maybe writing a CDC query that selects data out of a table whenever that data changes or is deleted or updated, etc. And using CDC queries, which are a thing in and of themselves, maybe massaging that data into a slightly different format for later consumption.
I think that's all the stuff we're saying. Apache, we're saying Kafka. You said Apache Pulsar. A lot of this is really Felipe's, forte, is somebody who's very fluent in AMQP and whatnot. So I don't know what this has got your head spinning here, Felipe.
Of course. Yeah, Rob, I was gonna say, like, my favorite feature of CockroachDB is CDC, because I've been with customers, like, we need to do a lot of integration, of course, using the power of Spring, using the Spring Cloud Data Flow, for that matters, to actually connect, integrate systems, integrate microservices. And at some point, the users, the customers wanted to say, hey, what is going on with my database? Well, let's start getting these kind of scenarios where we are going to do a wire trap, a kind of a pattern that we capture every statement you are sending to the database. We practically see if that comes back good, like the transaction was committed. Now, then let's go ahead and continue our flow. But now that I find that CockroachDB handles this internally, for me, it's like, oh man, I could save a lot of time with all these things. Now, in my past life, I was doing a lot of RabbitMQ, and now, I'm already contact engineering team, so I'm eager to actually put some code there, so we can integrate also Rabbit with the new stream queues. That is the competence of Kafka doing those kind of streaming thingy. Well, with all the Rabbit power, now you can have the complete system, right? So yeah, for me, that's one of the amazing features of CockroachDB CDC. Practically, you have event driven out of the box.
Yeah. And I think one of the most beautiful things of CDC is not only the fact that it's built in, the fact that it runs on our heavily battle tested distributed jobs engine. And it also runs and it is subject to admission control, which in CockroachDB, if you've got a very busy cluster, admission control will kick in to any like endogenous stresses like CDC, maybe backup restore operations, anything that might stress the cluster, and just limits the amount to which they can stress the cluster. So you're never going to impact your foreground workloads by long-running tasks like CDC, of which you might have hundreds of CDC change feeds, all publishing messages whenever data changes in a table.
Yeah, again, you brought it in house. It's now first order citizen. So it's like now CockroachDB can manage that. One of the old, I don't know, I don't want to say cliche tropes perhaps that you you have to do is try to give the database as much context as possible. Don't select star. Name of the show. Don't select star from the table and then filter in the application. Push your criteria with the select statement. Let the database do the filtering for you, because it can filter better than you can on the end and save you ridiculous amounts of time, especially sending that payload over. So again, pushing this kind of stuff so you're not bolting on extraneously this kind of event stream stuff. Instead, let CockroachDB handle the event stream, and it's able to apply things like admission control, as you said. It's a great example.
Even querying in Cockroach is done in exactly that way. If you need data from multiple ranges and you're filtering, aggregating, ordering by, Cockroach will only send you the data that you need from each of the ranges that you requested. It's not going to send all the data from all the ranges, and the gateway node, the node that your request hit, is going to be overwhelmed with data. No, it gets just the data it needs, and it performs maybe one final aggregation before sending it on its way.
One of the things that fascinated me, I had a chance to talk with one of the when I was up there in New York last September, was one of the engineers that's currently at Cockroach, and I'm angling to get him on the show here in the future. He had told me that when they built Cockroach from the ground up with things like ranges and replicas and that kind of thing, that decision was made to build it in a distributed fashion before the decision to use SQL as the API of choice was made. That was a later decision to say, let's talk to the system with SQL. So that to me tells me the distributed nature is really a firm foundational component of how it operates. And so to be able to then build these kind of features off of it is really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I think the hard work has been done up front, making the addition of features inherently distributed much easier.
And now you just go around and start taking everybody's lunch money, and you don't need that. We got that covered. That's cool. Let's see. Is there any other stuff we want to cover? What are some of the big events that are coming up for this year? If people want to find out more about CockroachDB, when and where can they go to find out about it? You might be more dialed into that than I am.
There's a bunch. So Roachfest is a great one to attend. We've got them, as with last year, we're running them across the world. This year they'll be in London on June the something or other. So make sure you're there on June the something or other. And in our London and Bengaluru Roachfest sessions, we'll have a workshop. So I'm delivering a workshop on an introduction to distributed SQL. And one of my colleagues, Alistair Parry, he's running a deeper dive on multi-region architecture. So that's a really good place to meet fellow users of CockroachDB, learn from the experts. I'll be learning a ton from our customers, and then hopefully replaying it back into the community as knowledge that I've learned. And then we're running the same in New York, and we're running the same in India. So there's a lot to look forward to. I'll be in Cyprus on, maybe less useful for anyone in the States who's tuned in, delivering an in-person event there. But we've got a bunch coming up. We'll be typically at most of the AWS summits and re:Invents, GCP events. So we're in most places, and we're always happy to meet the community and share what we can.
All right, fantastic. We actually do have a question that has popped in here close to the end of the stream. Mohammed's tuned in. Hey, glad to see you're here, tuned into the show. How's the costing of CockroachDB? And I love that you went and found the emoji, Mohammed, for a cockroach to put in there. When you compare it with Mongo, I don't happen to have pricing data in front of me right now, so unfortunately I can't offer that one. So we're gonna take a rain check on cost-based data. So apologize for that one, but
I'd have said exactly the same thing. I think, Mohammed, I would recommend, for whatever workload you're planning on running, be it on MongoDB or CockroachDB, choose the one that best fits your workload. Mm-hmm. I think if you've got a workload that lends itself beautifully to MongoDB and not necessarily CockroachDB, then use MongoDB. If it's the other way around and you have needs for strong transactional consistency in a relational database, then CockroachDB might be a better answer. But I would imagine both options, be they self-hosted or otherwise, will have a good pricing point for you. If you're looking to use a managed service, Cockroach, I can speak quite happily on Cockroach because I know it the best. But we have 3 tiers on our cloud offering. One is basic, whereby pricing starts from nothing, but obviously increases as your usage increases. But if you stop using it, or maybe your busy periods tail off overnight, for example, you don't pay anything for those periods. If you need like provisioned hardware, but still want a serverless multi-tenant kind of experience, then standard is a great option for you. And then there's the more advanced tier where you get dedicated hardware. But I would experiment with both databases to figure out which one works best for you.
I agree. That's a fantastic point. Is what kind of queries are you writing? What kind of data are you storing? Is it highly unstructured? Is it highly structured? There's a lot to answer in there before you actually get to the point of price. So I agree with that. One thing I do want to mention is today's episode of Select Star is brought to you by Cockroach University. You can either go to university.cockroachlabs.com or you can scan the QR code here, and there's some free classes right there you can take. One's an introduction to distributed SQL, and it's just a fantastic way to get your hands on actually playing around with CockroachDB. There's a server, a CockroachDB hosted server that you get to play with right inside the browser, and it's a lot of fun. So, and we have new content coming along the way, so check it out. And then, by the way, if you're wanting to see Mr. Rob come back to the show again, then you need to smash the like button and put it in the comments and say, Rob, we need more of that whiteboarding stuff. That was cool.
I'm going to come back. I'm going to check the YouTube channel, and I'm going to look for likes. And if I don't see any, it's going to hurt me bad.
That's right. Don't make Rob sad. Don't. I don't have the sad trombone to play. Just imagine it. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody, and we will see you next time.
This episode is over, but your learning has just begun. Visit CockroachLabs.com to find all kinds of content to expand your knowledge.